This project is about the impact of the COVID pandemic on the career progress of disabled researchers who are also from a racially minoritized background or are female or have caring responsibilities. We want to see how we can impact the decision makers, like those who fund research, the government who set up the policies around equality and diversity. The research was conducted in 3 phases. We started broad by having focus groups just to get a grasp of what people's experiences were.
Participants came from a range of backgrounds, including Black, Asian, white European, white British, and from different backgrounds in terms of gender.
The focus group inquired about what brought them into a career of research, what were their reasons for doing it, what kind of career guidance they got getting into this field, how much support they got, what they counted as success in their research, and then about the COVID pandemic as well. We did a thematic analysis, and those themes informed a short survey which had 60 questions. And lastly, the third stage was to deep dive further into the findings from the survey and find out what people are recommending should happen.
Not all impairments are visible. Largely, our disabled researchers don't have visible impairments. It's much more unusual.
I would say make disability much more visible. Disability is so invisible in academia.
If you feel marginalised for whatever characteristic, having the support of somebody who's kind of established in a senior role who can advocate for you, that's really important. So it's that idea of breaking down hierarchies, because you can't always do it on your own, unfortunately.
Being that ally to everyone in the organization, that's something everyone has to do, no matter where in the hierarchy they stand.
Principles of universal design are really important, i.e., just assuming that we have a diverse workforce which encompasses disability and other intersectional factors. So I think it has to happen at the planning stage. And obviously we couldn't plan for a pandemic to suddenly hit us, but we can next time.
If you're saying, well, let's have equality, diversion and inclusion policies, but there's still a feeling that, you're not allowed to work flexibly and you have to come in certain days of the week. If you're not listening to actually what people really need to thrive and flourish in an environment, then it doesn't really mean anything.
The COVID-19 pandemic led to a unique situation. It really showed that different ways of working, adjusting workplaces, allowing flexibility of not just where people work, but also when people work, is possible.
People who are disabled in the late career stage, like professors and those in senior management roles, feel they are under more pressure to have to prove themselves, to show that their contributions are valuable and that they meet those standards. So they feel a lot more under pressure than people who are not disabled.
When it comes to funding, funders need to consider the needs of disabled researchers as well. They might need longer funding terms. They might require a sighted guide if they're blind. They might require a BSL interpreter if they're sign language user. But that increases the costs, which then can make it look like there's less value for money. So that is another problem.
Disabled people have overcome multiple barriers in order to be effective researchers already, so have immense problem-solving ability, and that should be recognised as a value to the organisation rather than a cost to the organisation.
Something that was really interesting is that everyone was talking about it being a collective experience, but also it being a very individual experience within that collective experience. So there seemed to have been this kind of perception that Everybody had a really good time during the pandemic. Only I had a really difficult time because I had caring responsibilities. And they are talking about those water cooler type moments over a tea and a coffee in the team room, for example, and how missing that meant that they were missing out on support or not having the opportunity to say, I'm having a really rough time and I'm really struggling in one way or another. So they found that this whole online experience was quite detached from the reality of struggling at home with children or other people that they were caring for. There was a recognition at the time that people with caring responsibilities have got extra pressures and therefore may require a little bit more time, for example, or maybe offered special support in terms of, okay, well, you don't have to do 2 research articles in this time, 1 would be sufficient. But the fallout of that and the consequences of that are still being felt by those individual researchers. And again, that's something where the institutions and organizations haven't been very good at structuring that.
We found being the first in the family to pursue higher education and other things like the instability of other careers, the arts were cited as an example, motivated choices to become a researcher. We also found that racially minoritized researchers particularly appreciate support from line managers and experts in the field.
When I went to university for the first time as an undergrad, when I walked into my lecture hall, and I was sort of looking around like, well, there's not really anybody here that looks like me. I actually found a lecturer who was an Asian woman, and I think she was my saving grace because it felt like, even though I'm from a Black African background, she's from an Asian background, there was a lot that we sort of bonded over. She was almost a mentor for me and became my dissertation supervisor, where my research focused on looking at how Eurocentric the philosophy curriculum is. I think the way in which those that are in senior positions can advocate is by being fair, because I do think that bias exists in all of us, whether we want to admit it or not. There will be some people who are vocal and who use the policies in place to ensure that any sort of unfair treatment is called out and dealt with appropriately, but there will also be some that don't. So I kind of think that making sure that you are advocating for those, even when they can't or don't advocate for themselves, I think is very important.
We recommend setting up advocacy groups to help minoritized researchers so that they feel included, they can negotiate duties and navigate the career pathway in research. Line managers need to broadcast the research of racially minoritized researchers, researchers with learning impairments, and those with multiple impairments. Distinguished researchers need to give minoritized researchers the opportunity to lead public events and to develop new initiatives in research, such as leading expert panels and other advisory boards. We need to look at minoritization intersectionally and to consider protected characteristics alongside each other.
A lot of the people were advocating for a personalized and person-centered approach. We have to look at individual circumstances and on individual person's needs as to what is suitable for that particular person. Another aspect that I think pretty much everybody advocated for was the idea of flexibility, and flexibility in all sorts of different ways. For example, to not insist on meetings being in person, to allow people to attend meetings online in hybrid ways.
Working online needs to be seen on an equal level rather than a poor counterpart to face-to-face meetings and interactions.
When thinking about career progression for racially minoritized researchers, there were a number of recommendations that came through, including providing flexible funding criteria. So allocating funding rather than offering funding that you need to compete for. Also supporting researchers in their applications for funding and being mindful of the really unique journeys that racially minoritized researchers traverse.
We need to fund more research on disability, on race, on gender, on these critical identities, because it's going to shape the way we evolve our practices to ensure we're more inclusive for the students and staff that we want to attract.
As an academic system, we need to understand the experiences of marginalized researchers a lot more in order to create an academic system that is much more innovative, creative, and discovers more things.
We know that diverse teams are effective teams, and disability is just part of diversity.